film Rashomon reveals how one event can be seen in entirely different ways, depending on who is telling the story, showing that the truth can be elusive. In old Hollywood, scandals often had the same complexity, with multiple versions of events competing for the public's belief. Let's dive into these famous Hollywood controversies, each one with its own Rashomon-like mystery. In the legendary film Rashomon, we discover that the truth is never simple. Each perspective reveals a different story. What you're about to hear is a true Rashomon tale from Hollywood's darkest corners. Which version do you believe? Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was one of Hollywood's biggest stars, literally and figuratively, until the scandal of 1921 brought his career crashing down. Arbuckle found himself at the center of one of Hollywood's first major scandals, after actress Virginia Rappe died following a wild party in his hotel suite. What really happened that fateful night? Today, we unravel 5 possible truths in the Fatty Arbuckle saga. According to this version of events, Roscoe Arbuckle was nothing more than an innocent man caught in the crossfire of a media frenzy. Virginia Rappe's death was a tragic accident, but the press spun a tale of Hollywood excess, debauchery, and crime to sell papers. Led by infamous publisher William Randolph Hearst, the media ran sensationalist headlines that painted Arbuckle as a monstrous villain. Fatty Arbuckle threw the party. A young woman ended up dead, and clearly he was to blame, they shouted from every front page. But was there any real evidence? The prosecution had a shaky case, relying on rumors and questionable testimonies. After 3 trials, Arbuckle was acquitted, and the jury even issued a statement expressing sympathy for the way he had been treated. Was Arbuckle just a victim of a scandal-hungry press, or was there more to the story? What if Roscoe Arbuckle was guilty after all, but powerful Hollywood figures stepped in to save him? MGM had a lot to lose if one of its biggest stars fell from grace. Arbuckle was a box office sensation, and his downfall threatened the entire industry. Some believe that MGM's top brass, including the notorious fixer Eddie Mannix, worked behind the scenes to manipulate the outcome of the case. Witnesses were allegedly pressured, and evidence might have been buried. Was it a case of Hollywood protecting its own, pulling strings to ensure Arbuckle walked free, even if he was guilty? In this version, it's not about proving Arbuckle's innocence. It's about covering up his guilt. Then there's the possibility that neither Arbuckle nor MGM had anything to do with Virginia Rappe's death. According to this theory, Rappe had long suffered from serious medical issues, specifically involving her bladder. Witnesses claimed that Rappe fell ill during the party, and that Arbuckle and others tried to help her. Some medical experts suggested that she may have died from complications related to a ruptured bladder, and that the injuries were not the result of an assault, but a tragic accident that could have happened to anyone, at any time. In this version, Arbuckle was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time. Nothing more than an unfortunate bystander to an accidental death. Hollywood in the 1920s was a wild, lawless place, full of Prohibition-era booze, drugs, and endless parties. Some argue that it wasn't Arbuckle himself who was to blame, but the reckless environment that surrounded him. The party in Arbuckle's hotel suite was chaotic, full of flowing alcohol despite prohibition. People were acting without a care in the world. In this theory, the sheer madness of the Hollywood party scene, where the line between right and wrong blurred, created a situation where anything could happen. Maybe Arbuckle was negligent in hosting such an event, and maybe he even partook in the wild behavior. But the real culprit was the Hollywood culture that enabled such debauchery. In this view, responsibility is shared across the party guests, with Arbuckle being guilty of nothing more than poor judgment. Finally, we have the most intriguing possibility, that Arbuckle was framed. The key witness in the case was a woman named Maud Delmont, who was the first to accuse Arbuckle of raping Virginia Rappe. But Delmont herself had a questionable reputation, known for orchestrating blackmail schemes against rich and famous men. It's possible Delmont saw Arbuckle as her next target, using Rappe's tragic death as a way to launch an extortion attempt. Interestingly, her testimony was never used in court, possibly because it was considered unreliable. Was Arbuckle the victim of a premeditated plot? In this scenario, the tragic death was twisted into a criminal accusation, with Delmont pulling the strings for her own gain. So, what do you think really happened that fateful day? Was Arbuckle an innocent man ruined by the media, a guilty star protected by Hollywood, or something else entirely? Each version of the story casts a new light on the scandal that rocked Hollywood to its core. In the end, the truth, just like in Rashomon, depends on who you ask. Which version do you believe? In the legendary film Rashomon, we discover that the truth is never simple. Each perspective reveals a different story. What you're about to hear is a true Rashomon tale from Hollywood's darkest corners. Which version do you believe? On the morning of June 16, 1959, a single gunshot echoed through the Benedict Canyon home of George Reeves, the man who had become famous as TV's Superman. Reeves was found dead in his bedroom, a gun by his side, a bullet lodged in his brain. But what really happened that fateful night remains one of old Hollywood's most chilling mysteries. Let's begin with the official story: suicide. According to police reports, Reeves had been despondent over his waning career. Once the idol of millions, he found himself typecast as Superman, unable to escape the cape and tights. His personal life was no better. His engagement to socialite Leonore Lemon was said to be rocky, filled with arguments and frustration. In the months leading up to his death, Reeves reportedly drank heavily, his moods darkening. On that tragic night, after a party with a few guests, Reeves reportedly stormed upstairs in a fit of anger and never came down. A gunshot rang out. Leonore Lemon, Reeves' fiancée, reportedly muttered to her guests, "Oh, he's probably shot himself." Moments later, Reeves' body was discovered. The coroner declared it a suicide. A clear case of a man who saw no way out? Perhaps, but not everyone was convinced. Next, we have the theory of accidental death. Some believe that the night was far more chaotic than the police report suggests. The house was full of alcohol. Tempers were high, and perhaps someone, maybe even Reeves himself, had been playing with the gun. After all, it was an era where firearms were often kept casually as part of household decor. Could it have been a tragic accident? Witnesses recall hearing more than one shot that night, though only one bullet was found in Reeves' head. If there was more than one shot, could the gun have gone off accidentally during an argument or horseplay? Or worse, could someone have been playing with it and pulled the trigger without thinking? Then there's the possibility of murder, a much darker interpretation. And the first suspect? Tony Mannix. Reeves and Tony had been lovers for years, and by all accounts, their relationship was serious, until it wasn't. Reeves had recently broken things off with Tony to pursue his romance with Leonore Lemon. Tony Mannix, the wife of MGM executive Eddie Mannix, was known for her fiery temper and deep devotion to George. Some believe Tony never forgave Reeves for leaving her and, in a fit of rage or heartbreak, arranged for him to be killed. After all, Tony wasn't just another Hollywood socialite. She had connections. And in a town like Hollywood, where secrets could be buried as easily as careers, it's not hard to imagine that those connections might extend to more nefarious circles. But what about Eddie Mannix himself? Known as MGM's fixer, Eddie Mannix had deep ties to the underworld. He was the man who cleaned up the studio's messes, from hushed-up affairs to more serious crimes. If anyone had the power to make problems disappear, it was Mannix. Could Reeves' murder have been his doing? Maybe Eddie Mannix wasn't pleased with how Reeves had treated his wife. Maybe he wanted to send a message, either to Reeves or to anyone who might dare cross him in the future. The idea of Mannix ordering a hit on Reeves isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. After all, he had protected the MGM brand with ruthless efficiency for years, and Reeves' death was a loose end that some believe Eddie couldn't allow to remain untied. Or could the answer lie closer to home? Leonore Lemon, Reeves's fiancée, was with him that night, along with several guests. Known for her hot temper and wild streak, Leonore's behavior that evening raised more than a few eyebrows. One version of the story suggests that she and Reeves had argued fiercely that night. Some speculate that in a drunken fit, Leonore might have pulled the trigger herself, either by accident or in a moment of uncontrolled rage. One of the most damning pieces of evidence is her behavior after the gunshot. While guests were alarmed, Leonore appeared almost indifferent, allegedly remarking, "Oh, he's probably shot himself." It was an odd comment to make, especially before anyone had confirmed Reeves was dead. Was it a guilty conscience speaking, or simply the words of someone too detached to care? Finally, we arrive at the Hollywood conspiracy theory. In this version, the truth is much more complex and sinister. Reeves' death was not a suicide, nor was it a simple crime of passion. Instead, it was part of a larger cover-up, orchestrated by the powerful figures of Hollywood, people like Eddie Mannix and his network of influential friends. The theory goes that Reeves' relationship with Tony Mannix had made him a threat to MGM's carefully controlled public image. Perhaps Reeves had threatened to expose the affair or Tony's dark secrets. Perhaps his very existence was inconvenient to those who needed to protect the reputations of Hollywood's elite. In this version of events, Reeves' death was not only a murder, but a carefully staged crime, with police, the coroner, and even the media playing their part in covering up the truth. So, what happened on that warm June night? Was it a tragic suicide, an accidental death, or cold-blooded murder? Did Tony Mannix, heartbroken and bitter, arrange for Reeves' demise? Did Eddie Mannix use his underworld connections to silence the man who had wronged his wife? Or was Leonore Lemon, caught in a whirlwind of alcohol and anger, responsible for pulling the trigger? In the end, much like in Rashomon, the truth remains elusive. Every theory is compelling, every piece of evidence open to interpretation. Each witness, each player in the drama, tells their own version of what happened. And as with all great Hollywood scandals, the truth may never be known. So, what do you believe? Which version of this Rashomon tale rings true to you? In the legendary film Rashomon, we discover that the truth is never simple. Each perspective reveals a different story. What you're about to hear is a true Rashomon tale from Hollywood's darkest corners. Which version do you believe? On a cool April night in 1958, Hollywood's glamorous world was about to be shattered by a scandal that no movie script could have prepared for. In the lavish home of film star Lana Turner, Johnny Stompanato, her boyfriend and reputed mob enforcer, lay dead, stabbed by a knife that belonged to none other than Turner's 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane. The media exploded with headlines, but beneath the surface, there was something far more complex than a simple case of self-defense. Multiple versions of the story began to emerge, each one more shocking than the last. Which version holds the truth? In this Rashomon of old Hollywood, we explore the multiple angles of the Johnny Stompanato story. Version 1, the official account. The official version, the one accepted by the courts, is as straightforward as it is tragic. On the night of April 4th, Stompanato was in a heated argument with Lana Turner. Known for his violent temper, Stompanato had allegedly been abusive throughout their relationship, both physically and emotionally. This night was no different. As the argument escalated, Cheryl, terrified for her mother's safety, grabbed a kitchen knife and rushed to protect her. In Cheryl's version of the story, Stompanato turned the corner of the hallway, his rage palpable. In a moment of panic, she thrust the knife forward, not even realizing she had stabbed him. The knife plunged into his abdomen, and just like that, the man who had terrorized her mother lay dead. Cheryl, only 14 at the time, was immediately taken into police custody. After a brief investigation, the court ruled the act as justifiable homicide, self-defense in the heat of the moment. But as quickly as the case seemed to close, the whispers began. Could this really be the whole story? Version 2. The mother's secret in the glamorous and scandal-ridden world of old Hollywood. Image was everything. Lana Turner was one of the biggest stars of her time, and a scandal like this could easily have destroyed her career. But what if Lana, not Cheryl, was the one who killed Johnny Stompanato? Some believe that the night's events played out very differently. According to this theory, Lana Turner had been the one arguing with Stompanato that night. But it wasn't just a shouting match. Things had gotten physical. Fed up with his abuse, Lana reached for the nearest weapon, a kitchen knife. In the heat of passion and fear, she stabbed him, ending his life. But rather than face the media storm and potential jail time, she and her legal team concocted a plan. Cheryl would take the blame. She was just a child, and the court would go easy on her. Some say Lana's tearful testimony in court, her performance so perfectly calibrated, was not just the truth, but the performance of a lifetime. Was this Hollywood's biggest cover-up? A mother willing to sacrifice her daughter's innocence to save her career? Version 3. The Mob Connection. Johnny Stompanato wasn't just a Hollywood bad boy. He had deep ties to the mob. His connections to Mickey Cohen, one of Los Angeles' most notorious gangsters, were well known. Could his death have been more than just a crime of passion? Some believe that Johnny's demise was a professional hit, disguised as a domestic squabble. Stompanato had made enemies in dangerous places, and it's possible that someone wanted him dead. The mob may have decided that his relationship with Lana was drawing too much attention, or that he had crossed a line in his business dealings. In this version of the story, Cheryl and Lana may have been unwitting pawns in a much larger game. Johnny's death might have been planned by powerful figures in the criminal underworld, and the stabbing was simply a convenient cover-up for something much darker. Perhaps Cheryl was the perfect scapegoat, allowing those who ordered the hit to walk away clean. Version 4. The Starlet's Escape. There's another angle to this Hollywood tragedy, one where Lana Turner herself engineered the entire event. Trapped in an abusive relationship, desperate to break free from Stompanato's control, Lana may have seen no other way out. In this version, Lana carefully manipulated the situation, knowing full well that Cheryl's presence would make the perfect cover. Lana could have orchestrated the argument, provoking Stompanato into a rage, knowing that Cheryl would step in to protect her. The knife was planted, the plan set in motion. Lana knew that Cheryl would act impulsively, and in doing so, would provide Lana with the ultimate alibi. While this version paints Lana Turner in a calculating light, it also portrays her as a woman trapped by fame, the mob, and a dangerous man. Could this have been her only way out? Version 5. A tragic accident. Finally, there's the possibility that what happened that night was nothing more than a tragic accident. Cheryl, a young girl terrified by her mother's screaming, and Stompanato's rage, may not have intended to kill him at all. Perhaps she only meant to scare him, to protect her mother from further harm. In this version, the knife in her hand was meant to be a threat, not a weapon. But Stompanato, in his fury, turned at just the wrong moment. The blade entered his body not by force, but by pure misfortune. A twist of fate that left a man dead, and a girl forever marked by the violence of that night. A tragic accident or something more sinister? In the end, only those who were there know the truth. So, what do you believe? Was Cheryl Crane simply protecting her mother from a dangerous man? Was Lana Turner the true culprit, orchestrating an elaborate cover-up? Or was the mob involved, ensuring that Stompanato's death was handled quietly? In Hollywood, as in Rashomon, the truth is never clear. The shadows hold secrets that may never be fully revealed. In the legendary film Rashomon, we discover that the truth is never simple. Each perspective reveals a different story. What you're about to hear is a true Rashomon tale from Hollywood's darkest corners. Which version do you believe? Ted Healy, a name many may not recognize, was the genius behind one of the most famous comedy troupes in history, the Three Stooges. Without Healy, there would be no Moe, no Larry, no Curly. But his contribution to Hollywood wasn't enough to save him from a tragic, suspicious death in 1937, one that remains shrouded in mystery to this day. Healy was no stranger to the tough life. He was known for his brash behavior and quick temper. But on that fateful night, something happened that sealed his fate forever. The official reports say Healy died of complications from nephritis, or kidney inflammation, but those close to the situation knew there was more to the story. Much more. Rumors began swirling almost immediately after his death, and multiple versions of what really happened started to emerge, each as plausible and as elusive as the next. Which version is true? That's for you to decide. Let's start with the first version. Some say that Ted Healy met his end at the hands of one of Hollywood's most powerful stars at the time, Wallace Beery. Beery wasn't just any actor. He was MGM's biggest box office draw in the 1930s, and he wasn't someone you'd want to cross. The story goes like this. Healy had been drinking heavily that night. After an altercation inside the nightclub, tensions spilled out onto the street. It's said that Beery, along with two other men, including the mob-connected Pat DeChico, beat Healy mercilessly outside the Trocadero nightclub. Witnesses claimed Healy was so badly beaten that he was left unconscious, but when questioned, Beery denied everything. Conveniently, he left Hollywood almost immediately after Healy's death, taking a long, unscheduled trip to Europe, which raised more than a few eyebrows. Some say it was a studio-sponsored getaway, a way to keep one of their biggest stars out of the spotlight and away from any potential investigations. But the truth? It never came out. Wallace Beery's name faded from the story just as quickly as the rumors had begun. Is this the real story? Could Wallace Beery have played a part in Ted Healy's death? Or was this just Hollywood gossip, designed to deflect attention from the real culprits? The second version is far less sinister, but no less tragic. Ted Healy, by all accounts, was a heavy drinker. On the night of his death, Healy was reportedly extremely intoxicated. Those who knew him well weren't surprised. Healy often had too much to drink and could be unpredictable when he did. According to this version of the story, Healy got into a heated argument inside the nightclub, but no physical fight ever broke out. Instead, Healy, stumbling and out of control, left the club and somehow fell, injuring himself. Some suggest that Healy's cause of death had more to do with his excessive drinking and poor health than any foul play. The coroner's report backed this up. Officially, Healy died of nephritis, with alcohol listed as a contributing factor. The severe beating that people whispered about? Just speculation, or so the official story goes. But does this explanation really hold water? Given Healy's history of heavy drinking and deteriorating health, it could be true. Or it could be a convenient way to brush a more violent truth under the rug. Now, let's dive into another version of the story. One that doesn't implicate Wallace Beery at all, but rather focuses on two other figures tied to that night. Mob-connected agent Pat DeChico and a young Albert "Cubby" Broccoli, who would later become famous as the producer behind the James Bond films. According to this version, Ted Healy, already drunk, started a brawl with DeChico and Broccoli. The altercation got physical, and fists flew. Healy was beaten severely, with most of the blows landing on his head. Some witnesses claim that this beating, at the hands of DeChico and Broccoli, was what led to Healy's death just hours later. Why would DeChico and Broccoli attack Healy? It's unclear, but given DeChico's mob ties and his reputation for violence, It's not hard to imagine that a drunken argument turned into something far more dangerous. But, just like the other versions of this tale, no one was ever charged, and the full truth never surfaced. Was this a case of Hollywood's elite protecting their own? Or was it simply an unfortunate accident blown out of proportion by the rumor mill? Then there's the most mysterious, and in some ways the most disturbing version of Healy's death. It suggests that Ted Healy's fatal injuries were indeed caused by a brutal beating, but that the full truth was suppressed by some of the most powerful people in Hollywood. Wallace Beery was MGM's golden goose, and DeCicco's mob connections made him untouchable. It's been suggested that MGM, with its vast resources and influence, orchestrated a cover-up to protect its biggest star, Wallace Beery, and to keep any mob-related scandal out of the headlines. After all, bad press was bad for business, and the studio had everything to lose if word got out that one of its biggest stars had been involved in such a violent incident. In this version of the story, we see Hollywood at its darkest, a place where the truth can be bought, and justice takes a back seat to money and power. So, what really happened on that fateful night in 1937? Was Ted Healy the victim of a brutal beating at the hands of Wallace Beery? Did a drunken brawl with mobster Pat DeCicco and Albert Broccoli end his life? Or was Healy's death simply the result of years of hard living and alcoholism? The truth? It remains as elusive as ever. Like the characters in Rashomon, we're left to sift through the stories, rumors, and half-truths, trying to find the version that makes the most sense. But in the end, the real story of Ted Healy's death may never be fully known. What we do know is this: Hollywood's golden age wasn't always so golden, and sometimes the brightest stars cast the darkest shadows. In the legendary film Rashomon, we discover that the truth is never simple. Each perspective reveals a different story. What you're about to hear is a true Rashomon tale from Hollywood's darkest corners. Which version do you believe? It was 1927, and the glittering lights of Hollywood couldn't mask the dark secrets lurking beneath the surface. Paul Kelly, a ruggedly handsome actor on the rise, was entangled in a scandal that would stain his career forever. Dorothy Mackay, a dazzling Broadway actress, had caught his eye. But their romance wasn't a simple affair. It was wrapped in deceit, jealousy, and eventually death. Dorothy Mackay wasn't single. She was married to Ray Raymond, a popular vaudeville performer who, by all accounts, had his suspicions about his wife's growing fondness for Kelly. What started as professional admiration between Dorothy and Paul soon turned into a passionate, clandestine love affair. Raymond wasn't blind. He could feel the tension in the air, the way Dorothy spoke of Paul. One night, that tension exploded into violence, and only two people knew the true nature of what happened next: Paul Kelly and Dorothy Mackay. But as with all good Hollywood scandals, the versions of that fateful night vary wildly. Let's dive into the different possibilities, each one more twisted than the last. In one version of the story, Paul Kelly was just another man swept up in a volatile love triangle. Ray Raymond, furious at his wife's betrayal, stormed over to confront Kelly. A heated argument broke out. The men, both fueled by rage, threw punches. Raymond, larger and more physically imposing, was the aggressor. Kelly, finding himself overpowered, fought back out of necessity. It was self-defense, an act of survival against an enraged, cuckolded husband. According to this version, Kelly never meant to kill Raymond. The fight escalated out of control, and Raymond collapsed, fatally injured after a hard blow to the head. Dorothy Mackay, horrified at the scene before her, could only watch as her lover defended himself against her furious husband. Kelly, arrested for manslaughter, maintained that he had acted in self-defense. He hadn't gone there intending to kill anyone. It was a tragic accident, one that could have happened to any man caught in such a heated confrontation. But was it truly an accident, or was there something more sinister behind the violence? There's another version of the story, one whispered in the back lots of Hollywood, where every secret eventually makes its rounds. In this telling, Kelly's actions weren't so innocent. Paul had been consumed with jealousy. He knew Dorothy was still married to Raymond, and despite the affair, Dorothy wasn't planning on leaving her husband anytime soon. That night, Kelly had come to confront Ray Raymond, and things got physical almost immediately. Some say Paul, in his fury, struck Raymond down with intent, not in self-defense, but in a fit of jealousy and rage. Witnesses later claimed that the fight seemed one-sided, that Kelly's blows had been more calculated than spontaneous. Could this have been a crime of passion, a deliberate attempt to rid himself of his romantic rival, once and for all? And what of Dorothy McKay? Was she an innocent bystander in this scenario, or did she play a role in pushing Kelly to violence? In the final version of this scandal, Dorothy McKay is not a passive figure, but the orchestrator of the tragedy. In this telling, she had grown tired of her marriage to Raymond and saw Kelly as her way out. She had whispered in Paul's ear, encouraging him to stand up to her husband. But her motives went deeper. Some say she manipulated the entire situation, fueling Paul's jealousy and stoking the fire that would eventually lead to Raymond's death. The confrontation between the two men, according to this version, wasn't an unfortunate accident, nor was it spontaneous. It was a carefully orchestrated plan, with Dorothy pulling the strings. She knew Paul would lose his temper, and she counted on it. As Ray Raymond lay dying, Dorothy was already crafting her next move, ensuring that Kelly would take the fall while she walked away free. In the days following the incident, Dorothy was arrested as an accomplice. The press had a field day with the case, painting her as the femme fatale at the center of a deadly love triangle. Her letters, exchanged with Kelly, hinted at her role in the violence, though nothing was ever definitively proven. But was Dorothy really that cunning? Or was she just a victim of circumstance, caught in the crossfire between two men whose tempers spiraled out of control? Paul Kelly served time for manslaughter, spending 2 years in San Quentin before being paroled. His career, once promising, took a nosedive. Dorothy McKay, on the other hand, served less than a year in prison for being an accessory after the fact. Remarkably, both Kelly and McKay managed to rebuild their lives after the scandal. Kelly returned to acting, though he never regained his former glory. Dorothy married another man shortly after her release and attempted to return to show business, though her reputation was forever tainted. But the mystery remains. Was Ray Raymond's death a tragic accident, a crime of passion, or the result of a carefully planned scheme? 3 versions, 3 possibilities. Which one do you believe? Was Paul Kelly a man defending himself against an enraged husband? Or was he a jealous lover, pushed to the brink? And what about Dorothy McKay? Was she an innocent woman caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, or a puppet master pulling the strings behind the scenes? In Hollywood, the truth is often stranger than fiction, and in this case, the truth may never fully come to light.